person. Ask anyone who knows me. I'm mean and bitter and a failure at everything that I say I believe. I'm not a good person. Ask anyone who loves me. I never write, I never call, I never think about anyone at all.
And welcome to the bookcase behind me with your current host. No, I'm kidding. This is a temporary thing, but I will be your host for this week. And I know what you're thinking. We haven't done a regular episode in a while. And trust me, it's going to be a regular episode. By the way, this is me, Pastor Fillmore Alvarez from St. Mary's Evangelical Lutheran Church from the Philippines. Today, we're going to have a very, very interesting topic coming from our very special guest. And I'm sure you're wondering who he is. Well, of course, you've actually read it in the description of the blah blah. But yeah, you already know. But this man does not need any introduction at all. Please welcome our guest, Pastor Brendan Warr from St. Patrick Lutheran Church in Chipley, Florida, our actual host, now becoming a guest. Hello, sir.
Ooh, I think you've kind of stolen my thunder a little bit there with the introduction. That was off the charts. Wonderful. I'm doing well and still recovering from coming back from Synod and Colloquium, but doing well. It's going.
Oh yeah. Synod and Colloquium. Wish I could have been there, but it's because of the COVID thing and the fact that I can't get a visa to go there because immigration isn't very nice to me because I'm brown. I'm kidding, but or am I? So you've been in this. You went to the Synod and Colloquium with our course with the plethora of our clergy within the Diocese of North America. That must have been a very very interesting and fun experience. Now let's talk a little bit about what you did there first. We're gonna talk about other things that what's been talked about there, of course, after you tell us like the inside things. Like I know you actually interviewed most some of the pastors and the people there, but tell us some like inside things that some of the viewers might find interesting when going to the Synod and Colloquium. What should they expect?
Well, I guess the first thing is to explain what Synod and Colloquium even is. So, there's two aspects of this: the Synod aspect and the Colloquium aspect. And the Colloquium aspect comes first. That is for everyone, pretty much. Lay people can attend, the clergy's in attendance, and it's mostly just pastors presenting papers on topics that they have researched in the past year, things that they've learned, whether it be from God's Word, history, anything that would be of benefit to the church and anyone that's in attendance. So, like I said, lay people can come and attend the colloquium aspect of it. The synod is the meeting of the pastors themselves. So, together when we're in synod, it's literally the meeting of the pastors. So, the colloquium aspect of it is what I kind of want to talk about today, because this is something that for the listeners, if you wonder, what is our diocese all about, and what are we doing here? Well, the colloquium is a perfect opportunity to look at some of the topics that some of the pastors have been researching and diving into, and it's just all around fun. You get to talk to these pastors about their experiences, their research, their learning in God's Word and in the confessions and church history. So I would say this is not just a follow-up episode to last week's episode where I interviewed pastors, at the Synod and Colloquium, but it's also a little taste for anybody that maybe wants to come and join us at a future colloquium. And it was kind of, as far as my own personal experience, it was different. I would say that in the sense that last year was, well, it was 2020, and there was no Synod and Colloquium for the diocese last year, but I did do my colloquy last year, so technically this is the first time I've been to the Synod and Colloquium of our diocese, and yet I've been in the diocese for over a year now, so Yeah, it's a bit odd that I've already been in the diocese, and yet this is the first colloquium and synod that I went to. But 2020 is a little bit of an odd duck of a year for everybody. So, but with this year, I think that it really made up for lost time, and I feel like everyone got something out of it. I mean, I'm going to highlight some papers that I thought were incredible. And again, this is just a taste of what, if you come to the colloquium of the Evangelical Lutheran Diocese of North America, you get to hear stuff like this.
You did mention that you first wanted to explain what a synod and a colloquium is. So let's go first to the first word. What is a synod? What's the definition of a synod, Pastor Warr?
Well, the definition of a synod would be, if we're using it in the patristic sense, it is the meeting of bishops together. Now, because it's also looking into more in the office of the ministry, the way that the Lutheran confessions would see, the office of the ministry being one office of the ministry. We also include presbyters, or what some would call senior pastors, and deacons in that too. So the synod aspect of it is where the clergy of the diocese is getting together and discussing things that are pertinent to their ministry as God has given it to them. So whether that be discussing the church orders, discussing the missal, whether there be any updates from congregations. So it's really just a meeting of pastors together, and the lay people are usually not included in that, because again, it deals with the meeting of those who are in the office of the ministry.
All right. Okay, how about the second word? What is a colloquium?
The colloquium basically comes, I mean, you hear it when people talk about, like a pastor will say, well, I'm going to colloquy. Basically, it's the idea of a discussion, a talk, right? But it's a little different than something like a TED Talk, because, well, we're actually dealing with stuff that matters. So things that would sharpen us in our use of God's Word and the confessions, church history, all of those things that would be useful both for pastors and for lay people, in order to continue our growth in our education, continue to conform our minds to Christ, because ultimately, the scriptures tell us to seek after maturity and knowledge, not to stay with the milk, but also to develop into solid foods and meat, in a spiritual sense. So that's basically what a colloquium is, where clergy and lay people gather together to hear what has been talked about, researched, what's been gained as far as knowledge is concerned, and it's mostly just listening to those presentations.
Interesting. So now we know what a synod and colloquium is, because I often hear a lot of lay people using those words, colloquy, synod, and a lot of the times too, they do ask, like, what is a synod? What is a colloquy? Because it's not only them, pastors also throw that word around a lot, and
it also doesn't help that you have entire church bodies, not to name any names, but entire church bodies calling themselves synods, when technically, if we want to be really technical about things, a church body is not a synod, because in order to be in synod, you have to be together with other pastors in that, in the synod. So unless you're gathering together every single day and then calling it a synod, there's really no reason to call a wider church body, a wider fellowship, a synod, which is why the diocese then takes on the name of the Evangelical Lutheran Diocese of North America, because that's more historic, that's more patristic, and it makes more sense than to say fellowship, association, synod, because we only have one synod that meets annually every year. But what's actually what I am a part of is a diocese.
exactly. And in the bookcase behind me, we have a saying: words mean things, right? And that should be the saying of everybody. But apparently, it's not common knowledge that words mean things for a lot of people, not naming names. Of course, we should go to the meteor aspect of our discussion about the Synod and Colloquium right now. Let's talk about the things that were talked about in the Synod and Colloquium, starting with Pastor Sullivan's episcopacy in Saint Ignatius. What do you have to say about that talk?
So I've sent, just for everybody listening, I've sent Phil some of the highlights of the colloquium because this is stuff that just gets me giddy. Maybe our listeners might disagree, but I think this is some of the coolest topics and some of the best papers that were presented. Not a slight over any of the other papers. I mean, there's so many papers that was at this year's synod, mainly because it was kind of covering 2020 and 2021. But I mean, before we go into Pastor Sullivan's paper, which I absolutely loved, I got to mention, Pastor Henson did a paper on the Psalms, a teaching of the Psalms through the season of Advent, which is awesome. Pastor Ratovich talked about saints on the Baltic Sea, which is very obscure and hipster of him. Pastor Ratovich, if you're listening, that was a compliment, not an insult. Um, Pastor Stefanski's paper was awesome. Living as Lord, a brief consideration of Martin Luther's uh, on Christian liberty. Great stuff. And for anybody listening to this podcast, you can go to the ELDoNA's Facebook page and watch a lot of these presentations. So don't just take our word for it. Go watch those presentations. And you get a taste of what it's like to be at the colloquium. The only difference is if you're watching the presentations online, you can't ask questions after the session's over. So that's really where the real joy of the colloquium is, not just listening to the papers, but getting to interact with the pastors that wrote them. But yeah, going into one of my favorite papers, which was actually the first one presented, Pastor Sullivan's, he talks about the purpose of the episcopacy in Ignatius of Antioch, and talks about basically, I mean, if I could just boil down this paper into a single sentence, it is to say that the idea that we as confessional Lutherans have of the office of the ministry and the grades within the office of the ministry has been around since the first century. And ultimately, this is something that is needed not just for the ministers to know that, hey, this is something that the church has done, having bishops, presbyters, deacons within the one office of the holy ministry, but it's also a great way to argue against the papists who would claim this unending apostolic succession of the popes from Saint Peter all the way down to Pope Frankie of today. It's really interesting reading the letters of St. Ignatius and then having Pastor Sullivan expound on them to the point to say, basically, what we're doing as Lutherans is actually, well, it's actually Catholic. It's actually in keeping with our Catholicity, as we claim in our confessions that we are not deviating from the way that the early church did things.
Exactly. And a lot of people want to think that, well, by a lot of people, I mean papists and the Eastern Orthodox, say that, well, Luther wanted to change a lot of things. I have been reading the one of Luther's works that you did send me. I think it's volume 52, and it did tell us that, like, we retain everything that needs to be retained, and you retain everything that doesn't need to be uh, gotten rid of, and that includes every single thing that was beneficial for the early church up to the Reformation. And to this day, I don't understand why a lot of people want to get rid of things that don't need to be gotten rid of. Particularly, well, of course, very important. A lot of Lutherans have gotten rid of the episcopacy for not so good reason, and again, not naming names who they are. And this is really something that needs to be talked about, because even Lutherans within those synods um, do ask why. There's a big why there? If at the time it didn't help and now it doesn't help that it's not there, then why is it still not there? Then they go through all these mental gymnastics to explain that, not just understanding that they messed up early on, and they refuse to backtrack on that. But of course. So tell us more about what Pastor Sullivan talked about in regards to that paper and presentation.
Well, again, anyone who is listening can actually go on ELDoNA Facebook page and watch Pastor Sullivan's presentation, because I really can't do it justice in the short time that that we have here. But let me just give you a paragraph from it. So, quoting from the paper itself, as we turn to the idea of the centrality of the bishop for unity of the church, it is important to note that for Ignatius, the bishop always represents God the Father, the source of the Godhead. The centrality and primacy of the bishop over the presbyters and deacons is demonstrated by the bishop's oversight of doctrine and worship. Now, to someone who's unfamiliar with Lutheran history or early church history or the confessions, that sounds it sounds a little too Catholic for a lot of people. But really, when you look at what the office of the ministry is there to do, to provide, solid doctrine and practice, to give the word of God and the sacraments to the people, there also has to be oversight. I mean, this is a biblical idea that's going back to, the Apostle Paul's letters to Timothy and Titus, that the office of the bishop, within that office of the bishop, there is a unity within the diocese he serves. And so, I mean, that alone is mind-blowing to a lot of people, because they don't want to think of, we live in a very, how would I put this, Americanized, I guess, or democratically influenced idea of polity and church governance. And ultimately, it's really just an extension of our sinful desire to violate the fourth commandment, to violate the idea of authority, and to not want to submit ourselves to anyone. And of course, there can be corrupt bishops and everything. The Augsburg Confession, the Apology of the Augsburg Confession, and the Treatise on the Power and Primacy of the Pope in our confessional documents tell us what to do with corrupt bishops, which is, well, don't listen to them, right? But if a bishop is faithful to God's word and to the administration of the sacraments, then yes, he does have the office of oversight, and yes, the unity of the church does kind of goes with him. So it's an important thing for modern Lutherans to think about, especially Lutherans that are very much influenced by American ways of thinking or democracy. I think that if we go back to a more ancient tradition, and I think Pastor Sullivan really demonstrates this in his presentation on St. Ignatius, that if we were to go back to a biblical understanding of the bishop overseeing his diocese with faithfulness, then we're going to align ourselves even more with the ideal that the Lutheran confessors wanted. I mean, we did not want to get rid of the episcopacy just because the papists had corrupted it. We didn't want to get rid of things like the Mass just because the papists had corrupted it. These are things that I think are become great joy for us when we can just sit back and say, I don't have to worry anymore because my bishop's being faithful.
Exactly. And I always say, when it comes to the whole debate about episcopacy versus congregationalism, if you have one corrupt bishop, it's going to be far easier to get rid of that one person than a group of people, or try a 1,000 people trying to go against one person, which would be either their pastor or their district president, whatever that means. But yeah, it does say volumes, because it has worked for the church for thousands of years. And they would say, well, it didn't work because Rome ended up happening and the East ended up happening, and within those places, they did do wrong things and confessed wrong things. Here's my thing with that. and I'm even gonna add Anglicans here. Heck, let's just even add the ELCA and the LWF people. Yes, they do horrible things and they do say wrong things. However, they're consistently wrong. They're consistently wrong in a sense that you chose to be under that bishop who teaches those things. You say that what he says is right. So that becomes on you. Now, if you don't confess what that bishop is saying or what that, that diocese, for example, is saying, then you're free to leave, right? It becomes very confusing when each person that sits on the pew gets to have a say on something, and then you don't know who you agree with. With an episcopacy, you only have one person to blame when everything goes wrong, or if everything goes right, you have one person to thank or to actually look to, and it's much easier that way. Now, with Rome and all that stuff, yes, it's wrong, but it's consistently wrong. The Anglicans, they're wrong. They're consistently wrong. They chose to do that, and they chose to believe that, and they chose to confess that, and we can pinpoint particular people that endorses it, which makes it much easier. In contrast, with other with the congregational type of polity, and even like they're like it's not really congregational. Yes, but you don't have anyone to say, well, who are we going to correct? Who are we going to say did this? Who are we going to who are we going to blame? Who are we going to write something to tell them that what they're doing is wrong? Can't write to anybody. You can't write to the paper that defines what synod believes. That paper isn't sentient. There's no sentient being taking charge of things and saying this is what we are all going to believe and this is what we are not going to believe, and it makes it much more difficult, and that's what they refuse to understand. They refuse to accept that it has never worked fine. It has never worked smoothly. So they can't be consistently wrong and consistently right. You don't know who's who. You don't know who confesses what. And they all refer to a paper, some obscure writing that says, well, if you believe that, then that's it. But not everybody believes it. But who gets to say what that document actually means? No one. But if you have a bishop, the bishop can say, okay, this is what we believe about this point A, point B, point C, done. If you don't believe it, get out. If you do believe it, stay in here.
And, I mean, not to step on your toes, Fillmore, I know that technically I'm the guest here, but as a host, I feel it is necessary to to use this part to segue into the next paper we're going into, because Bishop Heiser actually presented a paper at the Colloquium. So since we're talking about bishops,
I'm gonna save Bishop Heiser's paper for the last segment because he is.
well, here's the thing. My host tendencies are kicking in, so I want to do. I really want to do the last paper is the last one that I sent to you, because I got some stuff for that.
Fine. All right. Let me put on my host face again. All right, Pastor Brandon. Let's move on to Bishop Heiser's presentation on post-conciliar church.
This paper ends up looking at basically what is the confession and ecclesiastical oversight in a post-conciliar church. And anyone who's familiar with conciliarism, it's basically the idea that councils are even above the authority of the Pope. That was a popular idea in Luther's time. We see it even in Luther's life and the life of the Reformers, that, if there was an ecumenical synod or council called to deal with the doctrine of justification, the things that were going on in the Reformation, maybe that would bring some peace, and maybe we could actually stay within fellowship of the Church of Rome. Anyone who is familiar with Reformation history knows, well, that didn't work out. Basically, a bunch of secret backdoor meetings and then some refusals on the part of the papists ended up to now they have the Council of Trent, which isn't really an ecumenical council, and all sorts of shenanigans going on in that sense. So a lot of kicking and screaming and whining from the papists, not wanting to play ball the way that the church has always played ball with each other. But they took their ball and went home. So you actually have the idea of a post-conciliar church. What does confessing the faith, our confession as Lutherans, what does ecclesiastical oversight look like in a post-conciliar church? This idea that, yeah, we're not going to get the General Synod, we're not going to get a council like we wanted. Unfortunately, the papists took their ball and went home. And if anyone knows their Reformation history, Lutheranism kind of sort of fell apart in, the years after Luther's death, and there was all sorts of tumult, but it all culminates in 1580 with the Book of Concord and the Dresden, German Book of Concord. And that is what we subscribe to. That is what, we as pastors, actually, when we are ordained in the ministry, we are actually called to confess the doctrines of the original Dresden German Book of Concord. Now, a lot of pastors have not read the German. I'm not very good at German myself, so I can't blame anybody. But one interesting note that I do want to highlight from this paper, again, this presentation is on the ELDoNA Facebook page. Go watch it. Incredible stuff. But one little highlight is that pretty much all of the translations of the Book of Concord that we have are actually the translation from the Latin of the Book of Concord, which is not the original. It's not the binding. The binding is the German Dresden Book of Concord. Can you guess, Phil, who were the only ones to actually translate the Dresden Book of Concord into English?
Oh, I wonder. Is it the Evangelical Lutheran Diocese of South America, or am I wrong?
No,
Okay.
That's not it.
Is it the Evangelical Lutheran Diocese of East America? No.
No, no, it's not even the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Nope, wasn't them either. So,
Oh,
it was actually the Tennessee Synod. It was David Hinkle's bunch that did it, and they borrowed the copy of the Dresden that they actually translated, borrowed it from a wonderful Lutheran theologian, Charles Krauth. So it's kind of interesting that, in some sense, there is, and again, not trying to disparage any pastors that might be listening to this, but I have a sinking suspicion because, well, I kind of experienced it myself, that a lot of guys have not, when they were ordained, they subscribed to something that they've never even read. And they've subscribed to something that they've never had an accurate translation of. Whereas the Hinkles and the Tennessee Synod actually did an accurate translation of the original 1580 Dresden Book of Concord. And that is incredible to me, that we've gone to the Latin and translated the Latin over and over and over again with all the different, new editions, whether it be Tappert's translation or the Concordia that CPH put out, Dow Benti, whatever it is, right? And it's just interesting that this small little synod, this small little diocese, if you will, that the founder David Hinkle just started because he was a confessional guy in the midst of heterodoxy, and they were the ones that did it. They were the ones that actually put the work in and did it. And if anybody wants a PDF copy of the Hinkle translation, go bother Pastor Stefanski. He's got it, and I bet you if you ask him nicely, he might say yes. He might give you that PDF. So, and I've been using the Hinkle translation for a few years now in my devotions, and this was the first time I was really coming to grips with the idea that while the other translations might be good, the other translations, obviously give us what Lutherans do believe, there's also problems with it not being the from the German, the Dresden. And yet we've got it. It's been done. It's been done by the Hinkels. The Hinkels were doing this type of stuff before it was even cool.
Ah, yes, David Hinkle, peace be upon him. Kidding. But, well, we mentioned David Hinkle now, and, there is a planned episode all about him. Stay put. But can you tell us a bit about David Hinkle? Saint David Hinkle, if you may. Just a little introduction.
Well, I don't really know if I can do much more justice other than spoiling the plans we have for the episode dedicated to him coming up in June, which will be around the time of his festival day. But if anybody wants a brief overview of the life of David Hinkle and the impact of the Tennessee Synod, then we'll go to last week's episode and listen to Bishop Heiser talk about David Hinkle and the Tennessee Synod, because this is something that, as I said last week, me and Bishop Heiser are kind of fanboys over David Hinkle because he was incredible. Like the Tennessee Synod was incredible. Yeah, they were a small synod when they first got started, only 5 pastors, but you know what? They affected confessional Lutheranism to the point to where I bet you if anybody's listening to this, whether they be pastor or laity, you don't even realize, if you've never heard of David Hinkle, you are still affected by David Hinkle and the Tennessee Synod, whether you realize it or not. And I'm not going to spoil anything for the episode we have planned, but definitely go back and listen to my interview with Bishop Heiser last week, because we do go through a brief overview of David Hinkle and the Tennessee Synod, and just give you a nugget of what's to come.
Exciting, isn't it? So that's why we should stay put and listen to the next episode. I promise you all, especially the people who've been asking me if we're falling off the wagon and thinking that, oh, we haven't been active in the past few weeks consistently. Maybe we're we're starting to dry out or something and suddenly quit BCBM. No, guys, we have a lot in store for you. Keep on listening. Just saying. But yeah, let's go on to the final presentation that we want to talk about this episode. Deacon Onken's work on the Dietrich Catechism.
Yeah, this was another interesting thing because, well, I'm just going to quote what Deacon Onken says at the very beginning of his presentation. It says, "Our diocese continues to receive praise for its commitment to use faithful resources of our Orthodox predecessors." Sorry, it's hard. I'm still recovering from Synod, guys.
Of course,
I'm a little slow, so. Our Orthodox predecessors in the history of Lutheranism, rather than lean on modern trends and popular commercial relevancy. That says a lot, we're especially if you decide, if anybody listening decides to come to a colloquium, trendiness is not necessarily going to be the flavor of the day type thing. We're actually going to be diving into some stuff, and Conrad Dietrich's edition of Luther's Small Catechism is one of them, and Deacon Onken kind of goes into this gem of the early 20th century. This Dr. Dietrich's edition of Luther's Small Catechism is interesting in a lot of ways. One of the things that it gets flack for in the time that it was published and even to today is that not only is the explanation that is published with this catechism very, very well received in certain parts, but it also has some criticisms of, well, there's a little too much to chew on. And some people accused it of being, well, a little too heady, almost as if, well, maybe we actually expect our people to continue to grow in their knowledge of what the catechism teaches. A funny thought there, right? So it got accused early on of being a little too heady, a little bit too doctrinally minded, a little bit too theologically rich. That was that. But what's interesting to me is what the explanation of Dietrich's catechism really does for the theology that ends up really being being looked at in later editions of the Small Catechism as being settled Missouri Synod doctrine, but not so much when you get to Dr. Dietrich's explanation. And if anybody's listening, just for a just to let y'all know, the explanation of the catechism is everything after that's published after Luther's text that he wrote. So there's Luther's Small Catechism, and usually that's published with an explanation. So a bunch of questions, sometimes hundreds of questions and answers that are meant by the author to expand and to really get a person thinking and really diving deep into what the Small Catechism teaches. Because the Small Catechism in and of itself is the 6 chief parts, very simple to memorize, to understand. But the explanation then is the author who's publishing this particular edition of the Small Catechism, their explanation and their diving deeper into the doctrines of the Small Catechism. And I wanted to quote, this is an interesting question here from Dietrich's Catechism explanation, and I want you to listen to this question and answer, Phil. And I want you to ask yourself if, let's say, Waltherian ideas of, let's say, justification, maybe you could say a justification that's universal or objective, does this sound like this? This is question 306 from Dietrich's Catechism, which was published by the LCMS back in the day. Question 306, what is justification? Justification is that act of God by which, from pure grace and mercy, for the sake of Christ's merits, he forgives the sins of a poor sinner who truly believes in Christ and receives him to eternal life. Now, I don't know about you, Phil, but I don't see any mention there of justification prior to faith. Do you?
I don't, but apparently Peter Piper packed a pack of pickled peppers. Saw a lot of things there. I mean, they would say, oh, well, that's just subjective justification. That's different. Oh well.
But here's the thing, though, and as Deacon Onken highlights in his presentation, if you go to question 308, which, if anyone's keeping track, question 306 is about justification. Go on to question 308 in Dietrich's Catechism explanation, that the truth of the doctrine of justification is proved by a great number of texts of Scripture. Question 309 briefly mentions the efficient cause, the meritorious cause, and the instrumental cause of justification. So, it's sounding a lot like Chemnitz's idea of imputation. And if anyone's familiar with Chemnitz's idea of, the 4 parts of imputation, universal objective justification cannot exist in a world where we confess the doctrines of the Book of Concord, at least as guys like Chemnitz, who kind of helped write the formula of Concord, he doesn't see it the way that modern UOJ advocates would, or the way that Walther even would. And so this is kind of what led to the controversy in some sense of Dietrich's Catechism. Walther actually did not like it. He did approve it for being published at first, but then he had concerns about the coverage of the explanation being deficient in matters of church and the office of the ministry. So it kind of sounds like CFW Walther kind of went back on the publishing of this explanation, and then ultimately it was replaced later on. But yeah, it's shocking to me. And if anyone wants to say that, that idea of justification, that sounds like limited atonement. Well, Deacon Onken fixes that for you real quick with question 324 from Dietrich's Catechism. It says, Christ is the propitiation of our sins, not for ours only, but also for the sins of the whole world. He is the Savior of all men, especially of those who believe. That is directly from Dietrich's Catechism. So this is not teaching a limited atonement, as some UOJ advocates would say we teach. That is absurd. We do not teach a limited atonement, but what we do teach is the biblical doctrine of justification by faith alone, which at one time was natural to talk about within the Missouri Synod without getting anyone, well, I guess except CFW Walther's feathers in a bunch.
Yep. Well, Walther really is the king of convenience. Right? Like, it's all too convenient that because something was not really in line with what his line of thinking was, like, oh, this catechism is no good, with no explanation at all. Like, like expelling a bishop with no explanation at all. Well, that's just how those Missourians go, I guess. Again, not talking about.
And if anybody wants to read Dietrich's Catechism, it's actually available for free. I think it's in the public domain. I'm not sure, but you can just Google Dr. Conrad Dietrich's Luther Catechism with explanation, and you can download it in a PDF. So if anyone has any want to look into that and to look at what was talked about in that particular catechism, go right ahead. And of course, as I've plugged several times in this podcast, go to the ELDoNA's Facebook page so that you can watch these presentations, because they're just absolutely wonderful.
Of course. Well, everything is available and no one knows where to get them. But it's always nice that we have resources like that should be made known, because we all know it's available, but not all are known, because there's maybe someone's trying to hide it, or something is trying to hide it. Of course, we do know why they're trying to hide it. Know what I mean? But oh well, I guess. Well, we're going.
Well, as a way.
Sorry, go ahead. Cut that
as
out.
a way to. Okay. Well, as a way, I guess we're kind of going into the conclusion, because again, my host tendencies are kicking in.
I was about to say, cut that out. Okay, cut that out. Okay.
No. Listen. I want to give this little final thought from my end on this, because I was remembering at one point that I heard a very prominent minister of a certain synod saying things like, people get involved in some imagined ideal of Lutheranism, that, you can have things like a bishop and confessional subscription and actual unity in the doctrine and practice, and people get caught up in this imagined ideal. And as much as I want to, put the best construction on things and say, well, maybe this particular pastor, when he was, doing this talk and everything, and chastising people for being so harsh towards certain synods, after going through Colloquium and Synod this year and experiencing, and I'm going to sound like, it sounds like I'm going Pentecostal, but I'm not. Just seeing firsthand that this is not some sort of imagined ideal, as some people would put it. This is actually real. Like, you actually do have pastors who confess the same thing, and we can go to the same altar and do that knowing that we are united in this confession, that our doctrine and practice is held in unity. That's not an imagined ideal. That is not a striving against the wind to get some sort of unattainable goal or something. This is something that has actually happened. And a lot of people are nebulously wondering, when's the split coming in confessional Lutheranism? I hate to tell you guys, the split's already happened. And it took me a long time to see it, but thanks be to God that I'm where I am today, because I can actually say beyond a shadow of a doubt that my fellow pastors in the ELDoNA and my bishop is we're all in this together. We're all unified because we confess what the scriptures and the confessions teach. We actually believe this sound doctrine, and it's not an imagined ideal. It's not something that you just hope for and you wish on a star. It actually exists, and anyone who confesses those things, well, that fellowship is there. You know, why do you stay in a fellowship that confesses something that you don't confess?
Beautiful. Yes. So do you have any closing remarks? I'm kidding. That was the best. This is the best way to end an episode. And again, I was very happy to be the host for today, even though I kind of think I wasn't. I'm kidding, Brandon. Of course, we're not gonna do this very often, are we?
Well, I mean, I don't know. It kind of felt good in the hot seat. I'm not gonna lie.
I'll do it for your birthday too. But oh well.
Okay.
All right. Well, it's been a nice time. Well, cut that out. How do I say the closing things? Okay.
Just say until next week. God bless.
All right. So until next week, everybody. God bless. Again, this is me, Pastor Phil, St. Mary's Lutheran Church, with Pastor Brandon. Going to see you next week. Goodbye, everybody.
I'm lazy, I'm a coward. I'm asleep all day in my room. I don't know why I am this way. I've been like this since I can remember. I try to keep up with everything I know I should do, but then